Charlie Kirk. On September 10, 2025, the campus of Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah became the scene of a high-profile political assassination that would shake American politics. Kirk, a 31-year-old conservative commentator and founder of Turning Point USA, had been speaking under a white tent emblazoned with the American comeback and prove me wrong slogans. Approximately 3,000 people had gathered to hear Kirk speak at the debate hosted by his youth organization. The event had been underway for just 20 minutes. Kirk was responding to an audience question about gun violence when the crack of a rifle shot echoed across the campus. The bullet struck him in the neck, hitting with such force that witnesses described him collapsing immediately. Surveillance footage later showed a figure moving rapidly across the rooftop in the moments after the shooting. The high-powered bolt-action rifle used in the attack was powerful enough that even at that distance, the single shot proved fatal. The shooter, later identified as 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, had carefully prepared for the assassination. The rifle recovered from nearby woods contained bullet casings with inscribed messages including "Hey fascist, catch," and lyrics from the anti-fascist song Bella Ciao. Robinson had positioned himself with a clear line of sight to the speaker's platform, selecting a high vantage point that gave him both an unobstructed shot and an escape route. What made the killing particularly disturbing was the methodical nature of the attack. Robinson, once a high-achieving student with a 4.0 GPA and merit scholarship, had driven 3.5 hours from his home in southern Utah, positioned himself with tactical precision, and executed the shooting in broad daylight in front of thousands of witnesses. Robb Elementary School. On May 24, 2022 in Uvalde, Texas, Salvador Ramos woke up in his grandparents' house. Salvador was 18 years old with a thin build and long dark hair. He sent a series of private messages on Facebook. "I'm going to shoot my grandmother." Minutes later, he sent another. "I shot my grandmother." Salvador had indeed shot his 66-year-old grandmother, Celia Gonzalez, in the face while she was in her bedroom. Somehow, she survived. Bleeding profusely, she ran across the street to a neighbor who called 911. Salvador sent his final message. "I'm going to shoot an elementary school." He took his grandmother's Ford F-150 pickup truck and drove to Robb Elementary School. Salvador was armed with a DDM-4 AR-15 style rifle he had legally purchased a week after his 18th birthday, along with 1,657 rounds of ammunition. Security footage showed him entering the school through an unlocked rear door. No one stopped him. The shooter had barricaded himself inside adjoining classrooms, 111 and 112, where 33 children and 3 teachers were trapped. What happened next would shock even seasoned law enforcement officials. For 77 minutes, police officers stood in the hallway, hesitating to enter despite hearing ongoing gunfire. 10-year-old Maya Cirillo watched as her teacher was shot in the head. She survived by smearing her dead classmates' blood on herself and playing dead. Some children called 911 repeatedly, whispering for help that wouldn't come in time. One child called 6 times over an agonizing 40-minute period. Parents gathered outside, some attempting to rush into the building themselves as they heard gunshots inside. Police physically restrained them as their children died just yards away. By the time officers finally entered the classroom at 12:50 p.m., 19 children and 2 teachers were dead. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. On February 14, 2018, students at the Parkland, Florida High School were exchanging Valentine's cards and planning celebrations when the fire alarm suddenly rang out at 2:21 p.m. It was the second alarm of the day, but this one wasn't a drill. Nicholas Cruz, a 19-year-old former student, had arrived on campus carrying an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle concealed in a rifle bag. He had taken an Uber to the school, calmly telling the driver he was carrying a musical instrument case. Security cameras captured him walking purposefully toward Building 12, a 3-story structure housing 30 classrooms and approximately 900 students. The shooter entered the building through an unlocked door and began firing indiscriminately into classrooms. The sound of gunfire echoed through hallways as students, initially confused by the alarm, suddenly realized they were being hunted. Freshman Jamie Gutenberg was running down the 3rd floor hallway when a bullet struck her in the back, severing her spinal cord. She was conscious as she fell to the ground, unable to move as the shooter approached. On the 3rd floor, geography teacher Scott Beigel had unlocked his classroom door to let students in when he was shot through the torso. Students watched as he collapsed in the doorway, his body preventing the door from closing, leaving them exposed. In room 1214, Alyssa Al-Hadaf texted her mother, "If I don't make it, I love you." Moments later, bullets pierced the classroom door. 5 rounds struck Alyssa in her chest, head, and abdomen. The high-velocity bullets created catastrophic internal trauma. Medical examiners later confirmed she would have been conscious briefly as her body went into shock. The shooter moved methodically between classrooms, firing through doors and windows. In room 1216, 16, students huddled in corners as bullets penetrated the walls around them. Athletic director Chris Hickson, hearing the gunfire, ran toward the sound to help. Security footage showed him being shot, dragging himself 20 feet toward shelter before being shot again at close range. The smoke from gunfire set off additional alarms, adding to the chaos and confusion, forcing surviving students to crawl through water now mixed with the blood of their classmates. Senior Meadow Pollock was shot 9 times as she attempted to shield a younger student. First responders would later describe finding victims with their phones still clutched in their hands, final text messages to parents left unsent. Sandy Hook Elementary School. On December 14, 2012, in Newtown, Connecticut, 21st grade students arrived at school excited about the approaching holidays. Most were just 6 years old. They had only recently learned to tie their shoes and read simple words. By 9:40 a.m., 20 of those children would be dead in one of the most horrific school shootings in American history. It all started approximately 9:30 a.m., when parents had just finished dropping off their children for what should have been an ordinary school day. The building's security system had recently been upgraded. All doors were locked as part of standard procedure. The morning announcements had just concluded when the sound of shattering glass echoed through the building's entrance. A 20-year-old shooter had arrived at the school carrying a Bushmaster XM15 E2S rifle, a Glock 20 SF handgun, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Unable to enter through the locked front doors, he shot through the glass panel adjacent to the entrance. Within moments, he was inside the building. The school principal, Don Hochsprung, and school psychologist Mary Sherlock heard the glass breaking and immediately left a meeting to investigate. Security footage showed them walking into the hallway, then suddenly turning to run back as they encountered the gunman. Both were shot multiple times from close range as they attempted to warn others. The bullets from the high-powered rifle passed completely through their bodies. The school's public address system had been left on, broadcasting the initial sounds of terror throughout the building. Teachers across the school immediately recognized the danger. In room 8, first-grade teacher Lauren Rousseau frantically tried to hide her students in the bathroom, but the space was too small for all of them. She gathered the remaining children in a pile in the corner, attempting to shield them with her body. When the shooter entered room 8, he fired his rifle at the huddled mass of teacher and students. The bullets passed through multiple victims. Medical examiners later determined that several children had been hit by the same bullets that passed through their classmates. Rousseau was killed instantly, but evidence showed some children remained conscious briefly after being shot, aware of what was happening as they lay bleeding. In nearby room 10, teacher Victoria Soto had hidden her students in cupboards and closets when the shooter entered. She stood in front of the classroom, telling him the children were in the gymnasium. Autopsy reports showed she raised her hand defensively as the shooter raised his rifle, with bullets severing her fingers before striking her face and chest. 6-year-old Jesse Lewis had been helping classmates escape when he was shot in the forehead. His final words were reportedly telling his friends to run, while he stood facing the shooter. Nearby, behavioral therapist Rachel Davino was found with her body covering a student, the back of her head destroyed by a bullet as she faced downward, protecting the child beneath her until her last moment. The shooting lasted less than 5 minutes, but by the time it was over, 20 children and 6 adults were dead. Parents gathered at the nearby firehouse, waiting hours for news, watching as fewer and fewer children were reunited with families. Some parents provided DNA samples to help identify their children's bodies, which had been rendered unrecognizable by the devastating power of the military-style weapons used against them. Columbine High School. On April 20th, 1999, in Littleton, Colorado, 2 students forever changed how America viewed school safety. What began as an ordinary Tuesday morning would evolve into a massacre that unfolded in front of live television cameras, shocking the nation. At 11:19 a.m., 2 seniors, aged 17 and 18, arrived at the school in separate cars. They carried 2 12-gauge shotguns, a 9mm carbine, a 9mm handgun, and 99 explosive devices. Their attack had been planned for over a year, with the original goal of killing hundreds through bombs planted in the cafeteria. When the bombs failed to detonate, they entered the school with guns. The library became the epicenter of the horror. At 11:29 a.m., the shooters walked in where 56 students and staff were hiding under tables. "Everyone with white hats, stand up," one shooter commanded, referencing the school athletes. When no one moved, they began shooting systematically under tables. Kyle Velasquez, a 16-year-old special education student, was the first killed in the library. Unlike others who hid under tables, he remained sitting at his desk, possibly not understanding the danger. Witnesses described how the shooter stood directly over him, firing a shotgun round point blank into the back of his head. The blast was so powerful it removed a portion of his skull instantly. Under another table, 17-year-old Cassie Bernal heard the shooters approaching. According to witnesses, one shooter bent down, placed a gun beneath the table, and asked, "Do you believe in God?" Before she could fully answer, he pulled the trigger. The bullet entered her left temple, passed through her brain, and exited the right side of her skull. The force threw her body against the table leg, where she died instantly. The shooters moved methodically between tables, sometimes taunting victims before killing them. When they found 16-year-old Isaiah Schulz hiding under a table, they made racist remarks before one fired a shotgun into his neck. The second shooter then fired his 9mm carbine into Isaiah's already fatal wound. The attack lasted 49 minutes while students hid, some lying motionless in classmates' blood to avoid detection. Some victims, like Dave Sanders, a teacher shot in the hallway, remained conscious but bleeding for hours, dying slowly before help could reach them. By the time it was over, 13 people were dead and 24 others were injured. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.